The most shocking moment of my life did not happen the day my father died. It happened the night we buried him in our mother's living room, with the food still warm on the table. Troy stood up from his chair slowly, like a man about to give a speech he had been waiting his whole life to deliver. Every head in the room turned toward him. Every eye softened with grief and expectation. I thought he was going to say something beautiful about Daddy. Something worthy of the man who had spent 30 years building everything our family had. I was wrong. I need to address what AITA has done to this family, Troy said. His voice cracked. Tears, real-looking, practiced tears, slid down his face. And then he turned and looked directly at me. She has already signed papers on Daddy's land. She sold it behind all of our backs. And she kept the money. The room went completely silent. Then, one by one, every face turned toward me. My aunts, my cousins, the neighbors who had known me since I was a child. My mother. That is a lie, I said. My voice came out small and shaking, exactly the way Troy had planned it to sound. My Aunt Yutun's hand flew to her mouth. My cousin Dara stood up from her seat. And my mother, my own mother, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not grief. It was not confusion. It was disgust. Troy had been planning this moment for months, and I had walked right into it. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand who I am, and what I had already given up for this family. My name is AITA Osei. 3 years before that night, I left my apartment, my career, and the life I had built for myself to move back home. My father, Raymond Osei, had been diagnosed with a serious illness. Somebody needed to care for him. That somebody was me. For 3 years, I was his shadow. I drove him to every doctor's appointment. I managed his medications, his insurance, and all his hospital paperwork. When the pain got bad at night, I sat beside his bed until he fell asleep. I held his hand during the treatments that left him too weak to speak. I cooked his meals. I washed his clothes. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. And when the hospice team arrived, I was the one who asked the hard questions and made sure Daddy was comfortable in his final weeks. Troy. He visited 4 times in 3 years. 4. And even then, he never stayed more than 2 hours. I never once complained. I never asked for a single thing in return. I cared for my father because I loved him. Period. So when Troy stood up that night and called me greedy, he did not just tell a lie. He took the 3 most painful and precious years of my life and threw them in the garbage. And the family believed him. Every single one of them. Drop a fire in the comments if someone in your life has ever taken credit for your sacrifice. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Here is what Troy actually did. I need you to understand every piece of it, because this was not a mistake. This was a plan, built carefully and executed coldly. Daddy owned 6 acres of land in Cedarfield. His own father had cleared that land with his bare hands, acre by painful acre. It was the most valuable thing our family had ever owned, worth far more than Troy was willing to wait for. 6 weeks before our father died, while I was at the hospital managing hospice arrangements, Troy traveled to a notary in a county 3 hours away. He used a forged power of attorney to sign documents in our father's name. Then he sold Daddy's 6 acres to a property developer named Warren Briggs for far below what the land was actually worth. The low sale price was not an accident. It was a cover. The real money, the portion that never appeared on any official paperwork, went directly into Troy's private account through a secret arrangement he had made with Briggs. Troy pocketed everything. But that was only half the plan. He also created a fake letter. A letter he claimed Daddy had written in his final weeks. A letter accusing me of pressuring our sick father, manipulating him, keeping the family away. Troy brought that letter to the repast. He read it out loud. He cried those perfectly rehearsed tears. And 43 people believed every word. Because grief makes people desperate for someone to blame. And Troy had carefully positioned me as the easiest target in the room. Stay with me, because what happened after I left that house changed everything. By the end of that night, my mother stood at her own front door and told me to go. She did not yell. That was the part that hurt the most. She said it quietly, the way someone speaks when a decision has already been made and nothing will change it. I think you should leave, AITA. Those 5 words. That was all. I stood in her doorway and looked at the room behind her. 43 people. Not one of them stepped forward. Not one said wait, or stop, or let us hear her side. They just watched me with a mixture of anger, pity, and the particular silence of people who have already made up their minds. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a garbage bag from under the sink. I filled it quickly. Some clothes, my phone charger, my father's Bible that I had kept on his nightstand through all 3 years of his illness. I carried the bag to the door. Nobody walked me out. Nobody called after me. Nobody followed me to the car. I sat in the driveway for 2 full minutes with the engine running. The lights were on in every room of the house. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Then I pulled out of that driveway and drove into the dark. I had no plan. I had almost no money. I had a garbage bag of clothes and a family-shaped hole in my chest that was so wide and so deep I thought it might swallow me whole. I was 38 years old, and I had never felt so completely alone in my life. I slept in my car that first night. I want you to sit with that for a moment. 3 years I had poured into that house and that man. 3 years of my life, given completely and without complaint. And the night after we put him in the ground, I was folded into the back seat of my car in a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner, using my coat as a blanket. By morning, my phone had 47 missed calls. None of them were from anyone checking on me. They were family members calling to confirm the story Troy had told, demand explanations I did not have, or simply express their disappointment. My AITA left a voicemail that lasted 6 full minutes about how my grandfather would have been ashamed. Cousin Dara sent a text. How could you do this to your own mother? Uncle Festus, a man who used to call me his bright one, sent one single word. Shameful. I read every message. Then I placed the phone face down on the seat beside me. I made a quiet decision in that parking lot. I was not going to beg or plead or send voice notes trying to explain myself. I was not going to give Troy the satisfaction of watching me fall apart in public. I had $400 in my account, a garbage bag of clothes, a car with half a tank of gas, and something cold and steady that had settled into my chest right where the grief used to be. I started the engine. I drove north. I did not stop for 6 hours. And somewhere around mile 300, I understood something clearly. I was not running away. I was beginning. The best thing about a city where no one knows your face is that you get to decide who you become. The worst thing is that you have to do it completely alone. I landed in a mid-sized city 560 miles from Cedarfield with almost nothing. I found a room in a shared house, 4 women, 1 bathroom, walls so thin I could hear my housemates breathing at night. I took the first job I could find, administrative coordinator at a small commercial property firm called Larkin and Associates. It was not glamorous. I organized files. I scheduled property viewings. I made coffee for men who had been in the industry for decades. But I kept my eyes open and my mouth shut and I watched how everything worked. I learned how property deals were structured, how land values could be pushed up or held down depending on who was doing the paperwork. The difference between what a transaction looked like on the surface and what it actually was underneath. Within 18 months, I had been promoted twice. My supervisor, Ms. Renford, was a sharp and honest woman who mentored me without ego or games. She told me I had a natural talent for reading land value and deal structure. She pushed me into professional certification programs. She put me in rooms I had no business being in yet. I absorbed everything. Not only because I was hungry, but because somewhere in the back of my mind, something was forming. A direction, a purpose. I did not have its full shape yet, but I could feel its edges growing sharper every single day. While I was eating instant noodles in a shared house 500 miles away, my brother was building a life on stolen ground, and he was making sure every single person who knew him could see it clearly. My cousin Zora was the only family member who still reached out to me. She was careful about it, short texts from a second number, occasional voice notes sent late at night after Troy had gone to sleep. Through her fragments, I built a picture of Troy's new world. He and his wife Portia had moved out of their cramped East Cedarfield apartment and purchased a 4-bedroom house in the Millbrook subdivision. The kind of neighborhood with homeowners association meetings and professionally landscaped lawns and neighbors who wave from their driveways with practiced smiles. Troy drove a new truck. Portia drove an SUV. Their 2 children were enrolled in private school. Troy had also started calling himself a property consultant. He had no license, no formal training, and no actual expertise. But he had money, confidence, and a performance polished enough to fool most people for a long time. The family loved him for it. At gatherings I was no longer invited to attend. Troy had become the patriarch, the one with answers, the one our mother leaned on. He gave speeches at family events about Raymond Osei's legacy and vision, as though he had personally earned the right to carry our father's name forward. He had buried me using Daddy's memory, and then he had worn that memory like a coat that belonged to him. But coats that do not belong to you always come apart at the seams. Always. Zora had just discovered something new, and what she was about to tell me changed the timeline of everything. Zora's messages had become more frequent by my second year away, and what she had uncovered about Troy was darker than I had imagined. Troy had weaponized the family structure. He made loyalty to himself feel like loyalty to the entire Osei name. He pressured relatives to cut contact with me. He monitored the family group chat. He spread the story that I was unstable and difficult, that my disownment had been necessary and right. The relatives who privately doubted him stayed quiet, because Troy had a way of making silence feel safer than truth. But the thing Zora told me that twisted something deep inside me was about our mother, Beatrice. Troy had moved her out of the family home, the house where she had lived for 30 years, and into a smaller house far from her church, far from her closest friends, far from everything familiar and comfortable. He told the family it was because the old property was too much for her to maintain at her age. But Beatrice had not wanted to move. Zora said Mama seemed smaller now, quieter. She spent most of her days alone in a neighborhood full of strangers. Troy visited less than the family assumed, and when he came, the visits were short. I had spent 3 years as my mother's shadow, cooking with her, shopping with her, sitting beside her while Daddy declined. And now she was alone in a house she had never chosen, tended to by the very son who had driven her eldest daughter away. But Portia was noticing. Troy's wife was watching everything, and she was about to reach out to me directly. 7 years after I drove out of Cedarfield, a padded envelope arrived at my office. I was a senior acquisitions analyst by then at a regional investment firm, a position I had earned through years of hard, quiet, deliberate work. I had not gone back to Cedarfield. I had not reached out. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece from absolutely nothing, and I had mostly made a kind of peace with not knowing what had really happened with the land. The envelope changed everything. It had a law firm name printed in the corner. Not a firm I recognized, but the handwriting on the address label was my father's, the distinctive forward-slanting script, the double-loop letters, the heavy pen pressure I had known my whole life. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. Long enough that my assistant knocked twice to check on me. I told her I needed a few minutes. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated 11 months before Daddy's death, addressed to me. My AITA, it began. If you are reading this, then what I feared has happened, and I am sorry I could not stop it. He had known. He had known for months what Troy was doing. The letter described what Daddy had observed, the secret meetings, the forged documents, the developer named Briggs visiting the house with paperwork Raymond had refused to sign. Daddy had also done 2 more things before he died. He had kept a detailed journal, and he had made 41 audio recordings. The envelope contained a USB drive. I locked my office door. I pressed play, and I heard my father's voice for the first time in 7 years. The recordings began simply. My father's voice, thin, tired, deliberately steady, narrating dates and observations like a man keeping a diary he hoped no one would ever need to use. He noted the first time Troy asked him to sign documents about the land. He described feeling uneasy. He talked about pretending not to understand the paperwork in order to buy himself time. Then he described calling the attorney who would later help him build my protection. By recording 15, the tone shifted. Troy had brought a man to the house, someone Daddy described as nervous, who mentioned Warren Briggs twice without being asked. The man tried to get Raymond to sign a consent form connected to nothing Daddy had authorized. Daddy refused. Then he picked up the phone and started building his case with the quiet, careful discipline of a man who had spent a lifetime trusting very little and observing everything. Recording 22 stopped my breathing. It was a phone call, Troy's voice, clear and unhurried, talking to someone I could only partially hear. Troy was discussing timelines, payment arrangements. He mentioned that Raymond didn't have long, the way you mention a weather forecast. And then he said words I will carry for the rest of my life. AITA doesn't need to know anything. By the time she figures it out, it'll be done, and she'll be the one they're all looking at. I pulled the headphones off. I pressed both hands flat on my desk. I breathed in slowly. I breathed out. Then I pressed play again, because there were still 20 more recordings. And what came next was worse than anything I had heard so far. Recording 39 had no words at all. It was 1 minute and 17 seconds of my father crying alone into a recorder in an empty room. No narration, no explanation. Just Raymond Osei, the quietest, most steady man I had ever known, sobbing softly in the dark. I sat with that for a long time after it ended. I did not move to the next recording right away. I just let the weight of it settle into me. Daddy had figured out what his son was doing. He had gathered the evidence. He had set up the legal protection. He had done everything he could with the time and strength he had left. And then he had gone somewhere private and cried. Because what do you do when someone you raised and loved becomes something you can no longer name? Recording 41 was entirely different from all the others. He was speaking directly to me. Not documenting. Not narrating. Just a father talking to his daughter. He told me he loved me. He told me he was proud of the woman I had become. He said the land itself was never the real point. The principle of it was. The truth of it. He said, don't rush. Don't rage. Let the truth ripen on its own time. It always does. Then he said one more thing. Something I was not at all prepared to hear. A secret about Troy. Something that, if it ever came out in front of the right people at the right moment, would not just cost my brother money. It would cost him the very identity he had built his entire life upon. I sat back in my chair, and I understood that this had never just been about land. I made one phone call that evening, to the law firm that had sent the package. The attorney who answered was a woman named Funk Adeyemi. Her father had originally taken Raymond's case before retiring, and Funk had taken over the practice. She spoke about my father with careful, genuine respect, and that told me immediately everything I needed to know about her. She explained what Daddy had done in plain, clear terms. In the months before he died, Raymond had quietly restructured the original land deed using a specific legal provision. In simple language, Troy could sell the land to Warren Briggs. Briggs could hold it for 10 years, but the moment Briggs sold it again to anyone else, I had a legally enforceable financial stake in those proceeds calculated at actual market value, not the fraudulent suppressed price Troy had arranged. The Cedarfield corridor had changed significantly in 7 years. A major infrastructure project was now being proposed nearby. The land was worth far more than it had been when Troy sold it. Funk also confirmed something about the forged power of attorney. It had been processed through a county with a documented irregularity in its notarization system during that exact period. Combined with the recordings and Daddy's journal, the legal case was solid. But I did not want a courtroom. Courtrooms are loud, slow, and give the other side time to prepare and regroup. I wanted something more precise, more personal. I wanted the exact moment Troy walked into a room believing he was about to collect, and I wanted to be the one who handed him something entirely different instead. I asked Funk one question: who was currently trying to buy Daddy's land? Her answer changed the entire shape of my plan. A major regional infrastructure project had begun acquiring land parcels in the Cedarfield corridor. The parcels they needed included Daddy's 6 acres, the same land Troy had sold to Warren Briggs 7 years earlier. The development was significant. A transit hub, commercial spaces, residential units, and a public plaza that would transform that stretch of Cedarfield into some of the most valuable real estate in the county. Briggs, Funk told me, had been struggling with the land for years. A quiet legal notice she had filed earlier had raised title questions that made the property difficult to refinance. The surrounding area's rising value meant holding the land was costing Briggs more in lost opportunity than he had anticipated when Troy sold it to him below market. He was ready to sell, and I was going to make sure I was sitting at the table when he did. Funk walked me through the reversionary clause in careful, plain language. My legal share of the new sale proceeds would be calculated at real market value, not the fraudulent price Troy had arranged. My share would be substantial, more, in fact, than what Troy had originally stolen and pocketed. I asked Funk to begin the paperwork quietly, with my name appearing nowhere on any public documentation. I told her to describe any legal notices as routine title disputes. Standard procedure. Nothing to attract attention. Then I called my employer. I disclosed everything, my connection, my legal stake, the full history. Their legal team reviewed the situation, cleared me to proceed, and assigned me as the lead analyst on the Cedarfield acquisition. I was going to buy Daddy's land back. Legally, professionally, completely. And Troy was not going to see me coming. I had positioned myself to win this legally and professionally. But I still had one critical problem. I needed Troy to walk into that closing room willingly, with his guard completely down. That was when Portia messaged me. Troy's wife, the woman who had stood beside him through all of it, the Millbrook house, the private school fees, the new truck, the performance of success. She found me on a platform I barely used. 7 words in her message. We need to talk. He doesn't know. I stared at those 7 words for a full day before I responded. I was cautious. Portia had lived inside Troy's world for years. She had attended gatherings where my name was spoken with contempt. She had worn the life Troy built on stolen ground. Whatever she had known or chosen not to ask about, she was not a neutral bystander. But people who reach out are people who need something. And people who need something usually have something to give. I replied carefully from an email address with no identifying details. I told her I was open to a conversation. No drama, just truth. She wrote back within the hour. We arranged a call for the following evening, while Troy was at a client meeting and the children were in after-school programs. When her voice came through the phone, she sounded like a woman who had been holding her breath for a very long time. I listened without interrupting. For 90 full minutes, I just listened. And what Portia told me reorganized everything I thought I understood about my brother. Hold on, because what she found inside that lockbox in Troy's home office will make your jaw drop. Portia had known something was wrong for years, but knowing and being certain are 2 different things, and Troy was a man who understood how to manage every story inside his own home. The things that did not add up, the notary 3 counties away, the way Troy panicked whenever someone mentioned Daddy's land, the obsessive effort to keep every family member away from me. She had filed them quietly in the back of her mind, the way careful women do. Then one afternoon, while Troy was traveling, she found a small lockbox in his home office. Taped beneath a desk drawer was a key she recognized. She opened the box. Inside was the original forged power of attorney document, the real land sale contract, showing the full undisclosed payment to Troy, and a handwritten note from Warren Briggs himself, confirming the under-the-table arrangement and the agreed split between the 2 men. Portia photographed every single page. She had not known what to do with the photographs at first. She had no plan. She had simply taken the pictures the way careful people document reality, because she had learned that reality has a way of being disputed later, and it helps enormously to have proof. I cannot keep standing next to him, she told me, knowing what I know. Not while your mother is alone in that house and you are out there somewhere still being called a thief. I asked her one question. Just one. Are you willing to hold those photographs until I tell you it is time? She said yes without a pause. Troy's greatest protection had just become my most important witness. He had absolutely no idea. My employer had been hired to identify and acquire several land parcels in the Cedarfield corridor for a large infrastructure project. When my research team flagged Daddy's 6 acres as one of the required parcels, I was already expecting it. I had been watching that corridor develop for 2 years. When my supervisor assigned me as lead analyst on the Cedarfield project, I said yes without blinking. I had already disclosed my personal connection and received full clearance from the firm's legal team. My legal stake in the land actually aligned with the firm's acquisition goals rather than conflicting with them, which made my position even stronger. We made formal contact with Warren Briggs. He was a tired-looking man in his early 60s whose property portfolio had seen better days. The Cedarfield parcel had become a persistent headache. Title questions made it hard to refinance. The rising value of the surrounding area made holding it increasingly costly. When we presented our opening offer, Briggs was ready to move. When his team asked who would represent the acquiring firm at the closing table, I submitted my name. What I did not tell anyone was that I had quietly arranged, through Zora and a third-party contact, for word to reach Troy that a significant land deal was closing in Cedarfield. A deal involving the Osei family parcel. A deal where showing up as a family representative could earn him a substantial advisory consideration. I framed the message as an opportunity. Money waiting to be collected. Troy confirmed his attendance within 12 hours. He thought he was walking toward another payday. He was walking toward the truth. Before I moved to the final stage, there was one more piece I needed confirmed. Something from recording 41. A secret my father had whispered at the very end of his message to me. A secret about Troy that I had carried alone since the day I pressed play. I called Uncle Festus. He was 81 years old. Sharp as ever, but slower now. A man in the final chapter of a long and attentive life. He answered on the second ring, like he had been waiting. He apologized immediately and plainly, without dressing it up. He said he had believed Troy's version because it had been delivered with such force at such a devastating moment, and because sitting with doubt had felt harder than accepting the story he had been handed. But over the years, holes had appeared. He had started asking quiet questions through old contacts in the community. Then I asked him the specific question, the one from the recording. Festus was silent for a long moment. He told me that through a private DNA arrangement in his final year, Daddy had confirmed something he had suspected for a long time. Troy was not Raymond Osei's biological son. Daddy had known for years and had chosen to raise Troy as his own out of love for Beatrice, carrying the truth privately and without accusation. But the land deed had been drawn specifically to benefit Raymond's direct biological heirs. Troy's entire legal claim to that land had been built on a foundation that did not exist. I had the recordings. I had Portia's photographs. I had the reversionary clause. I had the forensic document analysis on the forged power of attorney. And now I had this. Every single piece was in place. 2 weeks before the closing, Troy did something I had not planned for. Something reckless and impatient that threatened to derail my entire timeline. He went directly to Warren Briggs. Not through a representative. He showed up at Briggs's property office in person and presented himself as a representative of the Osei family interest in the land. He then made a verbal demand, an upfront commission, off the books, for facilitating the closing. He called it a standard informal arrangement between people who understood how business worked. Briggs said nothing to commit himself. Then, immediately, he called my supervisor to report the conversation in detail. My supervisor called me. I sat very still for one moment. Then I said, get everything in writing. Date it. Preserve every detail. My supervisor paused. Ada, are you running something here? I said, I am closing a deal. I need everything documented from this point forward. Everything. Troy had walked into Briggs's office and fraudulently misrepresented himself using a family connection he had no legal standing to claim. And he had done it because greed made him impatient, and 8 years of not getting caught had made him feel invincible. That documented report from Briggs was going straight into my binder. But Troy was now paying close attention. He was restless. Restless men with something to hide make last-minute moves. I asked Portia to handle it. She told Troy casually, the way wives slip important things into ordinary conversation, that she had heard the advisory consideration at the closing might be larger than first suggested. She dangled a bigger number. Troy confirmed his attendance again. He did not notice that the world was already moving in my direction. I had not been back to Cedarfield in 8 years. The night before the closing, I drove back alone, not to the conference room, not to my mother's house, not to any address that anyone expected me at. I drove to the land. It was a quiet November evening. Cold. The sky had gone dark purple at the edges, the particular color of late autumn in that part of the country. I pulled the car to the side of the road and walked to the edge of 6 acres of Cedarfield soil and just stood there in the silence. Daddy had walked this ground his whole life. His father had cleared it, acre by painful acre. That soil carried more than property value. It carried memory, sacrifice, and the specific weight of a family that had spent generations trying to build something worth leaving behind. I stood there and thought about my mother. She was going to be in that room tomorrow, brought in under the pretext of a title procedure requiring her signature, a real and legitimate procedural need, handled gently by Funk to avoid alarm. She did not know I would be there. I thought about Troy, about what it must cost a person every single day to build an entire identity on a lie and spend every year quietly hoping no one ever looks too closely at the foundation. I thought about recording 41. Not the legal instructions, the personal part, what Daddy had said he wanted for me after all of this was over. Not the money, not the victory, something quieter and more lasting than either of those things. I drove back to the hotel at midnight. I read through my binder one final time. Then I closed it and went to sleep. For the first time in 8 years, I did not dream about any of this. I arrived at the conference room 45 minutes before anyone else. I wanted to already be seated when they all walked in. The law office was on Cedarfield's main commercial corridor, a building I had passed as a child without ever imagining I would one day enter it carrying documentation of my family's entire fractured truth. The receptionist showed me to the conference room, a long table, 8 chairs, windows facing east, clean hard November light coming in from the right side. I placed my binder in front of the chair I had chosen, not at the head, not at the foot, but in the middle where Troy would see it the moment he sat across from me. I placed Portia's printed photographs in a separate label folder beside it. I set a recorder on the table in plain view and turned it on. Recording was legal with one-party consent in the presence of witnesses. Funk arrived next, composed and precise, everything her reputation had promised. She confirmed that Beatrice was already in the building, waiting in a separate room. My mother had agreed to attend what Funk described as a routine title clarification requiring her signature, which was true. She simply did not know I would be present. The firm's legal team arrived. Warren Briggs arrived with his counsel and looked at me with careful professional composure that told me he had been well briefed. The notary arrived. The title representative arrived. Every seat at that table represented something prepared, documented, and ready. At 9:53, the conference room door opened. Troy walked in wearing a new suit and the particular confidence of a man who has never truly been caught at anything. He scanned the room, and then he saw me. Everything in Troy's face happened fast. First, recognition, then disbelief, then a quick, visible effort to reset, to find his confidence again, straighten his posture, remember who he believed he was in any room he entered. He had not seen me in 8 years. I had changed, not beyond recognition, but in the way that years of hard and deliberate work change a person from the inside out. My stillness was different. My posture was different. And I was sitting at a professional table with a binder and a legal team at my side, looking at him with an expression that told him, without a single word spoken, that I had not come here to lose. Ada. His voice came out smaller than he intended. He corrected fast. What are you doing here? I am the lead acquisitions analyst on this transaction, Troy, I said. Calm, professional, flat. I have been working it for 8 months. I let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. Sit down, I said. We have a lot to cover. He sat, and as he lowered himself into the chair, I watched his eyes move to the binder, then to Funk, then to Warren Briggs, who looked back at him with careful, deliberate neutrality. Troy did not yet understand the full shape of what he had walked into, but something in his body already knew. I could see it in the way his hands settled on the table, flat first, then sliding into his lap. The way a person's hands move when they are trying hard not to show that something beneath them has shifted. Funk opened the meeting. Documents presented. Voices measured and professional. The floor beneath Troy was already cracked. He just had not felt it yet. Funk worked through the documents steadily. Transaction framework. Chain of title. Property assessments. Then she paused. She slid a document across the table toward Troy. Can you confirm that you executed the original sale of this parcel on behalf of the Osei estate in 2014? Troy looked at it. His jaw tightened slightly. Yes, as the family representative. In what official capacity? Funk asked. No edge in her voice. Just the question. As my father's authorized agent. And the power of attorney used to authorize that agency. Do you have documentation available for review? A pause. Just a beat. But it was a specific kind of pause, the kind that belongs to a man who has repeated a story so many times it has started to feel like memory, and who is now being asked to produce evidence for something that lives only in revision. It would be in the original conveyance file, he said carefully. It is, Funk said. We have it here. She placed the forged document face up on the table in the center of everyone's view. We also have a written opinion from a certified forensic document examiner regarding its authenticity. She placed the examiner's report beside it. And we have 41 audio recordings made by Raymond Osei in the months before his death. Several of them reference this transaction directly. She placed the USB drive on the table. The room went completely still. Troy stared at the drive. His mouth moved slightly. Then he said, those could be taken out of context. I looked at him across the table. The man who had cried those rehearsed tears in our father's living room. The man who had made our mother tell me to leave. Would you like to hear them? I said, evenly. We have plenty of time. We played 7 recordings. Selected carefully. 4 establishing the timeline and pattern of behavior, 1 capturing Troy's own voice confirming his intent, 1 documenting the arrangement with Briggs, and the final one in Raymond Osei's own voice, saying his son's name, describing what he believed his son was doing to the family. When my father's voice came through the speaker, thin, tired, but deliberately precise, the entire room changed. It stopped being a professional transaction and became something heavier and more human. Something that required more from every person sitting in it. Troy did not look at the recorder while the recordings played. He stared at the table. His hands disappeared into his lap. His shoulders moved inward, incrementally, the way a structure slowly shifts when something critical inside it has finally given way. When recording 39 played, 1 minute and 17 seconds of my father crying alone, one of the legal representatives shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Funk let it play all the way to the end without a word. Then she turned off the playback and gave the room a moment to breathe. We also have, Funk said, returning to her steady measured voice, a current market assessment confirming that the original sale price was approximately 42% below assessed market value at the time of sale. This differential is consistent with a suppressed price arrangement designed to accommodate an undisclosed secondary payment. She placed Portia's photographs on the table, clearly printed. The handwritten note from Briggs at the top of the stack, the one confirming the split. Briggs's attorney leaned forward. Briggs himself had gone a particular shade of pale. Troy looked at the photographs and said nothing. Then he said, I need to speak with an attorney. Funk said, you may. But you will want to read this first. Funk slid a final document toward Troy. A full summary of the reversionary clause Daddy had placed in the original deed. My legal stake in the secondary sale proceeds. The proposed distribution calculated at actual current market value, not the fraudulent price Troy had arranged 7 years earlier. The total was significantly more than what Troy had originally stolen. He picked up the document. His hands were shaking visibly now. He read it. He read it again. And then the conference room door opened. My mother walked in. Beatrice Osei was smaller than I remembered. Not frail. My mother was never frail, but condensed somehow, as if years in the wrong house and the wrong kind of quiet had pressed her gently inward. She wore her good navy coat with the brass buttons. She was carrying her Bible, which told me more about her heart in that moment than any words could have. Beatrice only carried her Bible when she needed courage. She stopped walking the moment she saw me. She looked at me, then at Troy, then at me again. Her face moved through something private and complicated. Then it settled into an expression I recognized, not quite grief, not quite relief. The look of a woman arriving, very late, at a truth she had been reluctant to reach. "Ada," she said. "Mama," I said. I had rehearsed composure for this exact moment. I had practiced it carefully for weeks. But the word mama bypassed everything I had prepared and came out carrying the full weight of 8 years, and I had to press my lips together hard and look at the table for 2 full seconds before I could look at her again. Troy stood up. "Mama, this is a setup. They have been." "Sit down, Troy." She said it without looking at him once. She walked to the chair beside me. She sat. She placed her Bible on the table. And she looked at Funk. "Tell me everything," she said. Funk walked my mother through it carefully, at a pace that matched what Beatrice could absorb. She presented the facts plainly: the forgery, the suppressed sale price, the secret payment, the reversionary clause Raymond had placed in the deed specifically to protect me, the proposed distribution that could correct the financial wrong without a courtroom battle. She did not play the recordings for Mama. I had specifically requested that. My father's private grief was not information that needed to be in that room. Some things are personal even in the context of justice, and Raymond Osei was entitled to keep his private pain private. My mother listened to all of it without speaking. Her hands were folded on top of her Bible. Her face stayed still. When Funk finished, Beatrice sat in silence for a long time. Then she turned to Troy. "You wrote a letter in your father's name," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was completely flat. "Mama, I was trying to protect." "You wrote a letter in your father's name," she said again, slower this time. "And you read it in my house, in front of my family, and you made me send my own daughter away." The room was so still I could hear the building's ventilation system humming. "And that girl drove out of this city," Beatrice continued, barely above a whisper, "and not one of us went after her." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Such a small gesture. Such a devastating one. 8 years of exile, and it ended right there, with Mama's hand over mine at a legal table in Cedarfield while Troy sat across from us with nothing left to say. I did not cry. I had cried for 8 years in private. I was done crying in the dark. I had prepared for Troy to fight. I had rehearsed for denial, deflection, anger, threatened lawsuits, demands for more time. I had prepared for every version of Troy except the one who actually showed up. He started talking. Not strategically. Not with any plan or posture. Like a dam breaking quietly and all at once, releasing something that had been building for longer than anyone in that room knew. He talked about growing up in Raymond Osei's shadow. About always feeling one step behind me, one measure short of what Daddy needed him to be. About the business loan Daddy had refused him 5 years before the land sale, not cruelly, just firmly, and how that single no had felt like a verdict on his entire worth as a person. He talked about the real debt, the credit cards, the private school fees, the Millbrook mortgage, the suffocating performance of a life he had started building before he could actually afford any of it. He had been drowning quietly for years behind the polished truck and the landscape lawn and the speeches about legacy. He talked about the night he forged the document. He said it in a flat voice, without decoration. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he would replace the money before anyone noticed. He told himself I was young and capable and would land on my feet. And then he said the thing that silenced the entire room. "I have known for 3 years that you were right. That you did not do anything. I could not walk the story back without losing everything. So I just kept going. He looked at our mother, then at me. His face had no performance left in it. No strategy. Just a man who had finally run completely out of room. I let Troy finish without interrupting. I did not look away from him once. When he was done, the room waited for me to speak. And I set aside every word I had rehearsed. Because the Troy I had prepared for and the Troy sitting across from me were not the same person. And responding to the mun in front of me with the speech I had prepared for the mun I had imagined would have been its own kind of dishonesty. I said what was simply true. I know you were in debt, I told him. I know Daddy's refusal hurt you more than you ever admitted to anyone. I know you told yourself a story about why what you did was acceptable. I understand how people justify things they already know are wrong. I paused. What I cannot forgive is the letter. Standing in Daddy's living room and reading words you had written in his name while he was barely in the ground and letting our mother put me out of the house. That was not desperation, Troy. That was cruelty. And you knew exactly what you were doing when you did it. He looked at the table. He did not answer. I nodded to Funk. She presented the final distribution framework. My legal share from the reversionary clause, calculated at full current market value. A separate amount distributed fairly among the estate's rightful heirs and our mother. Troy's remaining portion, after legal recovery costs, was significantly reduced. Enough to settle some debts. Enough to start over honestly, if he chose to. Troy signed every document. Every last one. The notary sealed the proceedings. Funk closed the meeting. I stood. I straightened my jacket. I picked up my binder. I said to the room, "Thank you all for your time." Clean. Final. Done. I did not need to follow what happened to Troy after that day. But information reached me through Zora the way weather reports from a neighboring town occasionally drift in, occasionally, without drama, without anything I needed to act on. His constructed identity came apart the way overextended things always do, slowly at the seams, then very quickly at the center. Former clients of his informal consulting practice stopped returning calls. People in Cedarfield who had respected and deferred to him began keeping a careful distance. The confidence he had performed for 8 years, the speeches about Daddy's legacy, the Millbrook house, the private school enrollment, had all been built on a story. And the story had been publicly corrected. Portia left 2 weeks after the closing. She had made her decision long before that day and had simply been waiting for the right moment to act on it cleanly. She took the children, moved to her sister's home in another city, and filed for separation. She sent me one message the night she left. "I'm out. Thank you for finishing it." I wrote back, "You did the hardest part. Take care of yourself." Several relatives who had turned away from me at the repast began calling in the weeks after the closing. Most of them circled the apology without quite landing on it directly. Cousin Dara was the exception. She called and said it plainly, "I accused you of something you did not do, and I am deeply sorry." I told her I forgave her. I meant every word of it. Not everyone apologized. I had not needed them to. An apology that only comes after evidence has been witnessed and signed is self-preservation, not genuine remorse. The record had been corrected. Daddy's name was protected. And something I had arranged quietly was about to make everything permanent. 3 weeks after the closing, I drove to Mama's house with a bag of groceries in my arms. The specific ingredients she had always used. The ones I had memorized as a small child, watching her cook and thinking I had all the time in the world to learn everything from her. She opened the door and looked at me for a moment. Just a moment. Then she said, "Come in and let me feed you." We cooked together. We talked about small things at first, the recipe, the neighborhood, the weather. We circled the enormous things slowly, the way you must when something has been sitting between two people for 8 years and you do not want to rush its opening. She brought it up herself. She said, "I should have asked more questions." She said it quietly, looking at her bowl. He cried. He showed me papers, and I was so deep inside the grief that I could not think clearly. She paused. "That is not an excuse. I only want you to understand how it happened." I told her I understood, that the anger had been real and had been earned, but that I had chosen to make it fuel rather than a cage. And that choice had built a life I was genuinely proud of. She reached across the table and held both my hands. She said, "Near the end, your father told me, B, she will be fine. She is the one I do not worry about." Her voice shifted. "I thought he meant you did not need us. Now I think he meant you would find your way back." I kept about 40% of my promise to stay composed. Before I left, I told her about the land, about the Cedarfield development plans, about a small community gathering space in the northeast corner of the new project with a brass plaque at the entrance, named permanently and publicly for Raymond Osei. She sat very still for a long time. Then she said, "That is right. That is exactly right." The way she said it told me everything. She had always understood that the land was never the real point. The name was, and the name was going to be absolutely fine. I woke up on a Tuesday morning in my apartment, the one I chose and furnished and paid for with money I earned starting from nothing in a shared house with thin walls and instant noodles and a determination I did not fully understand at the time. I made coffee. I stood at the window. I looked at the city beginning to move in the early light, and I stayed in that moment for a while, just breathing it in. I had a meeting at 10, a certification class in estate law that afternoon. I had enrolled because I wanted to understand, at a technical and precise level, how to prevent what happened to my family from happening to others. I had a call with my mother that evening. We talked every few days now, easy and unhurried. The comfortable rhythm of a relationship that had survived something extreme and found solid footing on the other side. The Osei community gathering space opened in May. Mama stood beside me at the ceremony. Zora was there. Festus was there in his best suit looking magnificent. When the project lead invited me to say a few words, I stepped to the podium and looked at the people gathered, family, neighbors, strangers, community members, and I said, "My father worked 30 years building something he believed would last. He did not only mean the land. He meant the kind of people his family would become. Real legacy is not what you leave behind in property. It is what you teach your children about who to be when everything is taken from them, and who to become on the other side of the losing." Mama squeezed my hand. I had no anger left. The work was done. And what lived now in the space where the rage used to be was something solid, something mine, something you can actually build on and trust completely. I drove home from that ceremony with the windows down and the cold air coming in. I did not once look in the rearview mirror. Not because the past did not matter, because I had already done everything that needed to be done with it. Every document signed, every truth spoken, every name restored. I was free. If you made it to the very end of this story, drop free like ADA in the comments right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear that quiet strength always wins in the end. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And tell me, what city are you in right now? What time is it where you are? What did this story make you feel? I read every single comment. Everyone. Justice served. Revenge screams. And the quiet ones. We always win in the end.